Hey guys, welcome to Music Industry Magic, the show where I interview music industry pros to find out how you can achieve the success you want in your music career. Welcome to the first episode of the Music Industry Magic podcast. Really excited about the show today. We've got guest Warren Huart on, who is founder of Produce Like a Pro and owner of Spitfire Studios in Los Angeles. I think you'll enjoy this one.
So, how did you get into the music industry? Like, what kind of started you off?
Well, the first thing was hearing A Night at the Opera when I was a little kid, well before I played guitar or anything. And my dad only played classical music and some jazz, but mainly classical music when I was growing up. My dad was an artist; he was a painter and a sculptor.
Okay.
So he just, he only liked, like I said, classical music and a very small splattering of jazz. Luckily, actually, one of the jazz guys he loved was Joe Pass. So I grew up listening to amazing jazz guitar with Ella Fitzgerald singing. So I remember that being in the house, which was wonderful.
Yeah.
And some Oscar Peterson and stuff like that, But essentially, it was all classical music. And then for Christmas, when I was super young, he came and gave me A Night at the Opera by Queen and gave it to me. A man of few words, and my father said, "This is worthy," and then gave me this album. And all I remember is being a little kid and opening it up and seeing like all these long-haired guys, and just being like, "What is this? What is this music? What's going on?"
Completely new music, yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastic. So that's what got me the bug. I didn't actually learn to play an instrument. I didn't play guitar till I was 15.
Oh, wow.
I was just a massive musical fan. I had a bedroom covered in posters of Queen. So I had like all the Queen posters. I remember buying Jazz and taking out the rather risque poster from Jazz and putting that up on the wall.
Yeah.
And, I made a stencil with the word Queen, the logo with the Q and everything. And I put it on the wall and I sprayed gold. So you had like the logo of the band all over the room. This is well before the days of any kind of social media, but I wish I had those photographs now. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, it'd be really amazing to see.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what got me started, and so I was an avid music fan, and then I think, when I was super young as well, John Lennon died, and that was it. So I started getting into the Beatles, and through that, 60s and 70s music, and Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, and especially Pink Floyd, still a huge fan of Pink Floyd. Roger Waters, one of the best shows I've ever seen, was on his last tour. And so for me, it was sort of growing up, and then growing up in the 80s was interesting because the music was so diverse. So by the time I got to be old enough to play in bands in the 90s, it was like all of that. I got all of looking back to the 60s stuff and the 70s stuff, and then the 80s that surrounded me as a kid, and then being in bands in the 90s was fun because I could kind of draw all of that stuff together. That's where I basically, it was sort of a love of it. And of course, the first guitar player that I remember thinking this is cool was Brian May. And so my first guitar, I say it was built with my dad, but my dad did most of the building. So that was my first guitar. I wanted to be Brian May, so we built our own guitar.
Yeah, and then how did that kind of transition into a career in music? So you started playing when you were 15?
It sort of, by 16, I was pretty good. I wasn't amazing, but I was a pretty good guitar player, rhythm, basic lead stuff. So I started playing in bands, and my parents, when I was 16, decided to move to Cornwall. We were living in this little village called Crookham Village, and they wanted to move to Cornwall, and basically my dad just wanted to take an early retirement and essentially just paint from living, paint and work in Cornwall. And at 16/17, I was coming to it was my 16th birthday. I didn't want to do it. And I remember at 16 in England, it was actually my 16th birthday. You could, with your parents' permission, leave home. So I got my parents' permission. I left home. They moved down, and at 16. So then it was like, well, I better start making some money. And I was going to Basingstoke Tech doing a foundation in art sort of follow my father's footsteps. And
Yeah.
I decided instead, well, I was doing that, but I was still playing in bands. So at that point, I ended up, moving after a year to the north of England and joining a club band up there and basically touring around playing in clubs and pubs and working men's clubs in particular, as well as like
Yeah.
discos and bars and nightclubs and everything. And it was a lot of fun. It wasn't a huge income, but it was enough to make a few £100 a month when rent was probably only like £40. And I lived in Carlisle in Cumbria. And I did that for 2 years. So I came back down at like 18, 19 years old, back down to the south and carried on. I did part-time work, of course. I worked in music stores. I worked in a music store called Kingfisher. And then I ended up working in Anderton's, strangely enough.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which, of course, everybody knows.
Yeah, and then you own your own studio and you produce like a pro and.
Well, I always had studios. I always had like really basic stuff. I always wanted to record music more than anything else. I mean, one of the advantages of growing up listening to bands like Queen and ELO and stuff like that was the production was so incredible. So, and I secretly really love prog rock. I really love like late 60s, early 70s, British progressive rock bands. And a lot of it was just amazing performances and great recordings. And so with that in mind, I always secretly wanted to have a studio. So I started off with, my dad's Sony Hi-Fi, and a Philips cassette player. And what I would do is I would like play like a really basic kind of rhythm. Like that. And then, maybe I would do, and basically I'd take that cassette out, put it in the hi-fi, play it back, and then play the overdub on the other cassette player. Do the overdub of that, and then play a harmony. And build up this really, really bad, hissy, noisy, guitar production, but that was me being, my best version of Brian May.
Yeah.
And so that's what started it all, Yeah, then I had like a Porter 02, Porter 01. It was the most basic one you could get. To be honest, all of the 4-track stuff on cassette always felt a little frustrating to use. I felt like the first big step up was ADATs, and like the early 90s when ADATs came out, that was huge. Absolutely huge. And even though at first I couldn't afford any, I still, had friends that had them and we'd go over and I'd track stuff. And then about early 90s, maybe about 93, it was about 93 maybe, I had some friends that had a 24-track studio. They had a 1-inch MSR 24 machine, which was this Tascam machine, and a Soundtracks console. I remember it was it was like 36 channels or something. It was a random number. Can't remember why. But anyway, so they had this console and they had this tape machine, and they were about to go on tour. And I get this phone call while I was working in a music store going, "Hey, Warren, can you come in and engineer a session? We've got to go on tour." And that session was, may have been actually 90, but that session was Louise Gothin with, who's Carole King's daughter, who's now an old friend of mine. And Andy Jackson was the engineer, who's Pink Floyd's producer and engineer.
Oh, wow.
And Gerland Dorsey, who was the bass player for David Bowie for about 20 years, was the bass player. So there I am, baptism of fire. Like, here it is.
Yeah.
Do this session. And that was it. I helped out and did the session, and that was it. I was bitten by the bug. I mean, I learned more from working with Andy Jackson on that one session, I think, than I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
Because I think what happens is a lot of people definitely try to run before they can walk, and they think that they're better than they are, because the technology makes it easy to record, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're recording something good. You know what I mean? So it's with that in mind, I think spend a lot of time really honing in your skills, your ability to record and mix. But most importantly, if you're working with artists, the ability to get the ability to get great performances out of people is another whole skill. It's a huge skill.
Yeah. Okay.
So shouldn't be underestimated at all. You've got to be able to get a great performance out of somebody. So otherwise, you're just working in isolation, which you can do. You can work in isolation. But, most of the music I hear at the moment that's done like that is, quite peripheral and basic. Yes, maybe one person, like in Kurt Cobain's instance, maybe he wrote a song on acoustic guitar and vocal or something, then brings it to the band. But the band bring it to the next level,
Yeah.
So it's having collaboration with others, even if you're the main songwriter, is what's going to grow your ability. So I think the next thing to do is make sure that you're collaborating with a lot of people. There's a lot of music. One of the disadvantages of working in tape is also its advantage. One of the advantages of digital is also its disadvantage, and that is the ability to copy. When you worked on tape, you couldn't copy anything exactly. It was never going to happen because, you'd hear this finished product and then you would have to try your best to kind of like do something similar. So somebody put out an album, like, they put out, Nirvana comes out and invent a genre called grunge. They didn't actually invent it, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They become the pioneers of grunge. Well, okay, so now you start signing 10 bands and you turn them into grunge bands, but it's their version of it, the best they can do in their interpretation.
Yeah.
The reality is now, if a band like Nirvana comes out and has a certain sound, give me a couple of hours and I can reproduce it exactly in digital. You can do things so similar. You can now copy and paste, take grooves, take feels, reproduce drum sounds, guitar sounds, bass sounds. You can make things. And so the advantage of digital is things are much easier. The disadvantage is there's less innovation going on, so that, when you listen to, like, you go to SoundCloud and listen to a lot of EDM tracks, close your eyes, scroll through 100. You don't know who's who. You're not sure if, am I still listening to the same producer or is this a different producer? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The access for the sounds and the ability to copy now is so easy. And so it's very quick to get started, which is great. But the bit that's missing sometimes is the individuality and the creativity. It's like everybody downloads the same software, has the same sounds, and, and listens to everybody else's stuff and is very easily able to replicate everything. Therefore, innovation tends to get left behind. So I think, the thing that you've got to do is like learn your tools, collaborate with people, learn from others, learn how to work with others. But most of all, get creative, get original, because just being as good as somebody isn't good enough. You might have somebody that sold 1 million albums, streamed 500 million songs. Making a version of a song which sounds just like them doesn't get you 500 million streams. Being able to say, I can make something that sounds just as good. It's like, no, do something that's equally good, that's different, and then you'll get the 500 million streams. A few YouTube channels which are massively successful, based on kind of a superiority complex of telling everybody that they're wrong. There's a very, very well known guy that has a video series. It's all like, what makes this song great? And it's always kind of a wagging mentality of like, they're better than you kids. And it drives me a little nuts, because what these old guys forget is like the sort of baby boomer, and I'm friends with a lot of like the baby boomer generation. Some of my best friends are in their 60s. It's just, I've got friends from 20 to 60 and all in between. But my point is like, sometimes what those guys forget is that the music they were listening, that they're telling everybody is the best music in the world, was made by people that were your age. If you think of like the Beatles in the mid 60s, there's a very famous quote from Danny Harrison, George Harrison's son, where it was his 24th birthday. And his dad was still alive. When he was still alive, George Harrison, he says, happy birthday, happy 24th. And Danny says to George Harrison, he said, what were you doing when you were 24? And he goes, let me think. Oh, yeah, I turned 24 when we were making Sergeant Pepper's. It's just like, people have to remember that, So he was like 19, 20 on their first album. You know what I mean? It's like this idea that all these experts with the wagging fingers that, know what a Mixolydian, blah, 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 Lydian, Phrygian, none of those guys knew that stuff. And yet they made the most interesting, exciting music. I doubt if Kurt Cobain would know what a major seventh is, let alone, you know what I mean? it's not important to make music. It's not important to be creative. What you need is ears. You need, like with Kurt's biggest contribution, apart from being an amazing songwriter, is the fact that he didn't obey any standards of musicality. So he would do major chord, minor third between them. You know, there's no scales in the world which have major chords and minor third apart. That doesn't exist in any scales. So you can have an expert with a successful YouTube channel explaining what he did. Yes, well, you see, he modulated using the Phrygian blah, blah, blah. Or you can just tell that idiot to shut up and realize that he's just a kid, picks up a guitar and said, this sounds good. And it doesn't help you be creative. Yes, theory is a wonderful thing. Technique is amazing. I still practice. Every day I'm still doing, practicing scales and patterns and all that kind of stuff, but I don't let it be part of my music. I develop my ear. You can never stop developing your ear. It's a big thing you ask about growing. Develop your ear. Understand how music works. But when you sit down with a guitar or a piano or programming or whatever it is, that's where it comes out. You don't theorize it before. You just get it stuck in and start making it. It's a learned technique. It's a developed ear that helps you but doesn't hinder you, because part of the problem is when I see the wagging finger, that kind of like superiority expert kind of way of educating, what it's doing is it's reinforcing sort of a very, very, it's reinforcing the trolls. There's so many people that are like, yeah, you're right, man. They're all like going, yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's almost like an excuse. Like, it's like, well, the only reason why I'm not good is because I'm not John Bonham. Trust me, I think John Bonham was one of the greatest drummers that ever lived, and everybody thinks that. However, I don't subscribe to the fact that he's the only great drummer, and that if you don't play like that, or you don't record drums with only 3 mics, there's a lot of that stuff. A lot of people talking about, like, I get people debating me like, why did you use drum samples? I'm like, well, because I've got a wall of Metallica guitars going on here. For the drums to cut through, I need to use a sample. And they're like, well, John Bonham didn't. I was like, well, John Bonham also didn't record with 8 guitars on either side of it.
Yeah.
Any Led Zeppelin song is like 2 guitars if you're lucky, sometimes 1. And maybe a bass and maybe a keyboard. But most of the time, Jimmy Page said it in an interview in the 80s. He said, I don't know why people think we were a heavy rock band. 90% of our music was acoustic guitars. It's like, it's just sort of like, it's a sort of, I think a lot of this mentality, the reason why it's so successful and the reason why I hope that, guys like you can push against it. I think the reason why it's so successful is it also reinforces people's, buys into the sort of a little bit of lackadaisical laziness. Because if you want to believe that everybody else was a genius, that can be like, well, it's not really worth me having to work 15 hours a day like they used to, because they were just geniuses. I think the secret is just work really hard at your trade, get better at it, develop your ear for writing, develop your techniques for playing instruments, but don't ever believe that is the be all and end all, that is all you need to make music. At the end of the day, Kurt Cobain idea of a guitar solo, as you know, is basically that's a guitar solo. You know what I mean? Didn't stop him writing these incredible songs. So I think that's, I love playing guitar and I love being able to show off the stuff I do, but I'm not Kurt Cobain. Kurt Cobain, John Lennon, these handful of people that we hold up to these really high standards of songwriters, there's a lot more to it. That's probably true of everything. EDM, that's true of, any kind of dance music, hip hop, blues, soul, funk, all of the greats. It's just guttural. It's just that ability to write from the heart and to say something melodically and lyrically that touches millions of people. It's not about the, they use the Phrygian over there. 99.9% of the time they didn't know. For instance, Across the Universe is a great example of that, because you've got the birds are flowing out like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither wildly as the E minor, away, G to A, and then he goes, da 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 da. Da, 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 and then this time he goes to G verse. So every time he does the end of that phrase, he changes the timing. Sometimes it's a 2/4 bar, sometimes it's a 3/4 bar, sometimes it's a 4. And I think there's 1 bar of 5 in there. And he changes the resolved chord each time. So one time it's a G minor, sometimes it's an E minor, sometimes it's an A7. And I don't think it had anything to do with him trying to be clever. I think he was just like, oh, I like the way that sounds, or the melody in his head went there, so he had to find the chord that supported it. Nothing. It was all instinct, all guttural, all just like, what am I trying to say? There's no like, but if somebody analyzed the song, they'd be like, well, you can see here, he did the minor substitutions. Like, no, he didn't. He just did what felt good. And I think that this is a key thing, because if we populate and help people understand that this is the truth, will actually bring more people into music, because then they will feel like they're not like the less than, because always pointing out superiority and experts and stuff negates creativity, because it seems to imply that unless you're able to like play jazz scales like this, that you're useless. When I watch somebody just playing mindless jazz scales, I'm just like, yeah, that's not music though. Not even jazz guitarists play like that.
It's almost like removing the ego from the music as well. It's like not writing the music to be popular or to be famous or to sound clever. It's just writing the music for the music.
Yeah, but it's also not being afraid to be pop, because one of the other things that we see a lot of, I see a lot of, and I know is discussed a lot in the music industry, is sometimes people's fear about writing something that people can sing along. They're like, oh, it sounds too pop. And you're like, yeah. Popular.
Yeah.
So we have to be really careful. It's like, it can't just be like, oh, I'm being pop, because at the end of the day, here we are now, entertainers, here we are now. That's a pop song. You can sing it. It's a popular song. It's a pop song. And if Nirvana didn't have that, then it wouldn't be Nirvana. If Radiohead didn't have Creep, nobody would know who they were.
Yeah.
I'm a creep. I'm a winner. What the hell I'm doing here? It's a pop song. Kids bought it. Everybody bought the song. So it's that. That's also a skill in itself. I say this all the time. It's like, there is this sort of like, you've got, say you go over here, you've got like art and creativity and prog, and like you can write a 7-minute absolutely insane, really clever song. And over here you've got a 4-chord 6/4-1/5, like literally not even thinking about it. If I play, I can go it's a pop song. It's that's how long it takes to write that kind of 6/4-1/5, and dress it up, and you've got a pop song in this time it takes to play it. The difficult thing is pop over here, prog rock over here. The difficult thing is this is a little tiny area where it crosses. It's just about this wide, where you can do everything. And that is like The Cure at their best. That's Queen. That's David Bowie. That's like Nirvana. It's like where you can do both. You can have a song that's pop enough that 1 million people will go and buy the album, or 500 million people will stream it. That's it. That's that little tiny thing. I mean, look, obviously, Bohemian Rhapsody, I mean, it does all of those things. It hits on all levels. It has time signature changes, key changes. It's about 7 minutes long, absolutely everything. It's also one of the most successful songs of all time. So those things are the things that come every once in a lifetime, but they're what we should be striving for, where you can do it all. You can show off your ability and your cleverness or your dumbness, because sometimes showing off your dumbness is just as cool. Think of Redemption Song by Bob Marley.
Yeah.
You know that song, it's just like, so it's him on a classical guitar. And it's just so dumb and so simple. But the melody's beautiful. The lyric is insane. It makes you think, you believe it. It's captured in just the right way. If you're going to write a song about slavery and poverty and overcoming, centuries of racism, if you're going to write a song like he wrote and get, what's better than just sitting down and hearing it, a guy singing it live on a cheap guitar? That says it, no, that's the way to present that song, as opposed to like, well, I put the orchestra on it, and all this kind of stuff. These are all the skills. Collaboration is going to be the key. If you want all of these skills, collaborate with people, learn from others, work with others. It's the number one thing I could make this whole discussion about for me.
What can you expect from a career so if you choose a career in music, it's not going to be all that, amazing arena tour, playing to huge crowds, everyone cheering your name. There's going to be the grind and the work as well.
A new career in the music industry, it's tough. I think it's tough to answer specifically because there's an illusion of success. And that's one of the problems I think YouTube has, is there's people that are successful on YouTube but could never be successful with their music outside of YouTube. So they become like these thought leaders, and they're telling people how to do things, which they can't really do very well themselves. So, the reality is you need to sort of do everything. If I was you, I would have a YouTube channel. I would be teaching what you're learning, because frankly, most of the people that are teaching still don't know what they're doing themselves. They just might have really nice haircuts and they're really good, and maybe they speak really softly and today we're going to talk about, and everybody's like, oh my God, I love your voice. It's so soothing. And you watch the video and you're like, but you didn't teach anything of any use. Or they've got one idea that they stretch out for 20 minutes, so it's a tough one. I think that you should be doing that. I think everybody should have a YouTube channel. Everybody should be doing social media. Everybody should be also collaborating. Everybody should be recording artists, their own tracks, do everything. It's kind of the world we're in. The tools are so easy to use now. There's really no reason why you should not be creating at least 8 hours a day. If it's your job, do a video a day, spend an hour, shoot a video, do some social media stuff, spend an hour or so on that, write a song, do some production, mix somebody else's track. I mean, that's a day's work. Do that every day. Sometimes you're working for free, sometimes you're working for cheap, and sometimes you're getting paid well. Put your money up for film and TV, put your songs up for film and TV and hope to make money that way. There's so many different ways to do this. It's all part of the process.
Thank you for the interview. It's been amazing.
Thank you. It's a lot of fun.